At 6:12 local time, this Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot was on a mission that was crazy, even by Ukrainian standards, a low-altitude strike on a key bridge to the most drone-saturated airspace on Earth. But what he would learn about Russia's newest weapon would change how every air force on the planet thinks about air combat. The mission briefing said this corridor was open. It was wrong. And he was about to learn that at 900 kilometers per hour, the MiG-29 screamed east, so low that the frozen fields under him blurred into a gray-brown smear. This was the approach. Friendly rear areas first, then the gray zone where control changed by the hour. 35 kilometers to the release point. 15 minutes of low-level flight through airspace that intelligence had mapped, that ground controllers had deconflicted, and that was supposed to be survivable. The air around him was packed with other aircraft. Above, between 100 and 300 m, Ukrainian and Russian reconnaissance drones tracked movement across the front. Below, hugging the ground at 20-50 m, FPV attack drones from both sides hunted people and machines in an endless robot war. The pilot was threading the gap between them. 50 m, right in the middle, a corridor where friendly traffic had been temporarily grounded and enemy activity was supposed to be minimal. And that's when his launch warning system screamed. The sound was wrong. Not the steady pulse of a search radar finding him. Not the urgent warble of a SAM lock. This was one sharp tone. Missile guidance already on, already tracking. Something had shot at him, and he hadn't seen it coming. The pilot reacted on instinct. Stick back, throttle forward, flares bursting into the slipstream. The MiG's nose pitched up as the G-forces crushed him into his ejection seat. He was climbing, losing terrain masking. At 100 m, 150, 200, trading invisibility for the chance to outrun whatever was behind him. The missile, if it was a missile, didn't hit him. No impact, no explosion. Just a fading scream as whatever had been tracking him lost lock in the flare cloud. But now he was at 300 m exposed, and his RWR was lighting up with new threats. A Buk battery to the south painting him. An S, 300 somewhere to the east. He jumped out of one trap, and into another. Then he saw them. Two shapes, maybe 3 kilometers out, silhouetted against the gray morning sky. Delta wings, 3 and 1/2 meter wingspan, moving slow, loitering, turning toward him. Geran-2 drones. The color drained from his face. He'd been briefed on this, the new Russian tactic that had started in December. They had begun strapping R-60 air-to-air missiles to their Geran-2 reconnaissance drones, turning surveillance platforms into hunters made for one purpose: swatting Ukrainian aircraft flying low-altitude strike missions exactly like the one he was flying right now. The R-60 was infrared-guided. His radar warning receiver couldn't see the launch. The first missile had come out of nowhere because there was no radar to warn him, just a heat seeker dropped from a drone that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The Gerants were turning toward him. If they had more missiles, he was about to find out. He rolled hard and dove, dumping flares, trying to ruin their angle. At 200 m, he was still too high. The Buk radar was tracking him, building a solution, and if he stayed up there much longer, it would fire. But the Gerans were above him now, and going lower meant giving them a perfect shot at his engines. Another white flash. The second one was fired. The pilot shoved the stick forward and dove for the deck. Afterburners screaming, flares streaming behind him like a comet tail. The R-60s were old missiles, first-generation seekers. Easy fool, not very smart. He leveled at 40 m, so low he could see individual fence posts whipping past. His RWR showed the Buk still radiating, but not launching. He dropped below their engagement envelope, so low that the radar couldn't see him anymore because of terrain, which bought him a few seconds of safety. Above him, the missile chase heat signatures that weren't attached to his aircraft anymore. The second R-60 also detonated on flares. The Gerants, now out of ammunition, kept their lazy orbit. They couldn't shoot him themselves, not anymore, but they reported his position to something much worse. The pilot exhaled. He was alive. He was also completely off course. The evasion had pushed him north, away from the planned corridor, into airspace that hadn't been deconflicted. His heading was wrong. His altitude was wrong. And when he keyed his radio to request a new vector, the response came back in fragments. Corridor compromised. Working alternate, then static. It sounded like ground control was running a marathon underwater in the busiest battlefield on Earth. Right now, he was suddenly alone. The pilot checked his instruments and tried to get his bearings. The release point was still out there, 22 kilometers east. The mission was still valid. He just had to get there through airspace that nobody had cleared and nobody could see. He turned east and pushed the throttle forward. And that's when he saw the drones. FPVs, a stream of them, maybe 200 m ahead, crossing his flight path at his altitude. Small, fast, dark against the gray sky. Russian strike drones heading toward Ukrainian positions, or Ukrainian interceptors chasing Russian drones. He couldn't tell, and it didn't matter because at 900 kilometers per hour, he was closing on them at 250 meters per second, and there was nothing he could do but fly through. They passed beneath him, above him, around him. He wasn't sure. By the time his eyes noticed movement, the drones were already behind him, and new ones were appearing ahead. The pilot's hands tightened around the stick. This was the nightmare scenario, the one the briefers warned about, but nobody had answers for. The P-Cross sector had become the most droned, saturated airspace in human history. 20 FPVs per mile of frontage on a slow day. But right now, he was caught in the P-Cross version of Black Friday, as both Ukrainian and Russian drones flew toward each other's lines. The only thing he could do was go forward. His eyes strained to the canopy, trying to spot shapes against the winter sky. The FPVs were 30 centimeters across, dinner plates with rotors. At this speed, at this distance, they were invisible until they weren't. He was crossing a football field every 0.4 a second. If one appeared in his windscreen, he would have time to flinch, and nothing else. His N019 radar was useless. It was built for fighter-sized targets, not objects with the radar cross-section of a hot dog. His infrared search and track couldn't see cold plastic and lithium batteries. Every instrument in his cockpit had been built for a different war. The only sensors that mattered now were his Mark 1 Mod 1 eyeballs, and they weren't fast enough. Suddenly the radio crackled again. Vector 090. Heavy activity above 60 m. Stay below 50. Below 50. He nudged the stick forward, dropping to 45 m. The ground was a blur beneath him. At this altitude, power lines and cell towers were the least of his worries. The fiber optic cables that Russian drone operators trailed behind their FPVs. Hair-thin wires that photographers had captured draped across ruins like spider silk. Those could take him out in the blink of an eye. One into his intake could shred his compressor. He'd never see it coming. Another broken transmission. Ukrainian interceptors active. Airspace contested. Recommended Ukrainian interceptors. His own side's drones were now in the mix, chasing Russian FPVs, adding more objects to airspace that was already saturated. Ground control was trying to find him a path, but their picture was minutes old, and the situation was changing by the second. At 900 kilometers per hour, a safe vector from 3 minutes ago might as well be ancient history. Then a shadow crossed his peripheral vision. Close. Too close. An FPV, maybe 50 m away, crossing left or right. He didn't have time to react before it was behind him. Then another below, almost skimming the frozen fields. Then a cluster ahead and high. Black specks against the gray sky. The pilot made a decision. He couldn't stay down there. Every second in this altitude band was a dice roll against collision. The mission was still 15 kilometers ahead, and the odds of reaching it through this swarm were getting worse by the second. There was only one way out. He shoved the throttle past the tent into full afterburner. His engines roared as raw fuel dumped into the exhaust. The MiG surged forward, G-forces pressing him back, acceleration climbing past 1,000 kilometers per hour. Then he pulled back on the stick and started climbing. Early, before the initial point, before the planned release parameters, he was punching out of the swarm the only way he could. Up and out, trading invisible drone threats for visible radar ones. A Russian Buk found him immediately. His RWR lit up as the fire dome tracking radar locked on, painting him with energy that would guide a missile straight to his cockpit. He was at 500 m, then 1,000, then 2,000. The radar held him the entire way, building a firing solution, calculating where he'd be in 10 seconds. The toss bombing maneuver he was trying was a relic from the Cold War, designed for nuclear-armed fighter bombers that needed to throw gravity bombs at targets without flying straight overhead. The physics were simple: climb steep, release at the top, let momentum carry the weapons to the target while you dove for safety. American and Soviet pilots had practiced it for decades against imaginary enemies. Nobody had practiced it while a Buk M3 was actively tracking them and drones flew past you at hyperspeed. The textbook said this maneuver required a clear threat environment. The textbook had clearly never been to Paperovsk. The pilot held his climb, 2,500 m, 3,000. The Buk could fire any second, and he'd have maybe 8 seconds to rethink his life. But if he broke off now, he'd have to fly back through the swarm with nothing to show for it. The mission was still valid. The bridge was still there. His ground forces were counting on him. 3,500 m. His iPad showed release parameters approaching. The Buk radar was still tracking, still building its solution, and the pilot understood with cold clarity that he was betting his life on a math problem. Could he release the bombs and dive below the radar horizon before the missile caught him? 4,000 m. The iPad flickered yellow. Close enough. His thumb found the weapon's release. 2 thuds shook the airframe as the AASM hammers fell away. The pilot was already moving, stick forward, rolling inverted, pulling through a split S that would have failed him in flight school. The MiG's nose dropped toward the earth as he traded altitude for speed, diving at an angle that pushed the airframe toward structural limits. Behind him, the bomb's rocket motors ignited with flash, pushing them toward Mach 0.8, beginning their 15 kilometers flight to the bridge. The Buk fired. His RWR screamed a launch warning as a 9M317M missile roared off its rails somewhere to south, accelerating to Mach 4 in seconds. The pilot didn't see it. His face was down toward the earth. Altimeter unwinding. 3,500. 3,000. 2,500. Try and put the planet's curve between himself and the radar guiding the missile toward him. The 9M317M is a semi-active homing missile. It didn't carry its own radar. It followed reflected energy from the fire dome illuminator, chasing the brightest spot in the sky, the same way a cat chases a laser out on the wall. Just not cute or funny. If the pilot could break that illumination, the missile would go blind. The only way to break illumination was to drop below the radar horizon. The math was brutal. Missile closing at 1,400 meters per second, distance about 8 kilometers. Time to impact, 6 seconds. Maybe 7. Time to reach terrain masking altitude at this dive angle, 5 seconds. Maybe 6. 1 second of margin. Maybe the pilot held the dive. 2,000 m, 1,500. The airframe was shaking now, buffeting at the edge of control. 1,000 m. He could see individual trees. Below him, individual buildings, the texture of frozen fields rushing up. At 600 m, he started to pull out. G-forces crushed him into his seat, graying his vision. But he held the pull because leveling out 1 second too early meant the radar would still see him and the missile would still track. At 200 m wings level, he was racing west at maximum dry power. His RWR showed the fire dome searching, hunting, and then nothing. He dropped below the horizon. The illumination was gone. The 9M317M seeker lost lock 3 seconds before impact. Its guidance computer commanded a last-ditch climb. Proximity fuse armed, searching for anything to hit. It found empty air. The warhead detonated 300 m above the Ukrainian countryside, fragments raining down on frozen fields. The pilot exhaled. He was alive. His bombs were flying. And he was about to do something monumentally stupid. The only way home was west, back through the swarm he had just escaped. The safe corridor that was supposed to carry him home didn't exist anymore. The only option was to retrace his path through airspace still saturated with drones he couldn't see. He dropped to 40M and punched west. 15 kilometers behind him, 2 French bombs were fighting a war of their own. The AASM Hammers had separated cleanly, their rocket motors burning for 15 seconds before burnout, pushing them to Mach 0.8 along a ballistic arc toward the bridge coordinates. Each bomb was basically 3 weapons in one. GPS guidance and ring laser gyros in the nose, a solid rocket motor in the middle, and control surfaces on the tail that could adjust 50 times per second. The French designed them to put 250 kilograms of explosive through a specific window from 70 kilometers away. But the French designed them for a world where GPS signals arrive clean. The R-330 ZIL stations blanketing Prask had been jamming satellite navigation for months. Every precision weapon dropped in this sector suffered degradation, JDAM-ERS drifting off target, drone navigation going wild, artillery shells guided by GPS missing by dozens of meters. The jamming was constant, widespread, and brutal. Inside each bomb's guidance package, the military GPS receivers were fighting for signal. They were hardened units, stronger than civilian systems, built to work in contested electromagnetic environments. But stronger wasn't the same as immune. Position errors were building up, small at first, centimeters of drift, then meters. The bomb's onboard computers recognized the degradation and did exactly what their French engineers had built them to do. The ring laser gyros inside each guidance package had been measuring acceleration since before release, building a math model position based only on physics. No satellites required, no outside signals needed, just a memory of where they started and the laws of motion calculating where they were. The trade-off was precision, GPS guided. The ASM could hit within 1 meter. On inertial navigation alone, accuracy degraded to 10M. Still good, still deadly, but the difference between a direct hit and a near miss was now about 50/50ths. And the pilot had the same odds as he crossed back into the drone swarm. The drones were still there, FPVs swarming in patterns that made no sense. Ukrainian interceptors mixed with Russian strike platforms. Chaos stacked on chaos. His radio was still cutting in and out. Ground control was still trying to find him a path through airspace that was changing faster than anyone could track. He didn't climb this time. He couldn't. The Buk had already proven it could track him, and he didn't have the fuel for another afterburner run. The only way through was straight and low and fast, ice straining against the canopy, praying the odds stayed in his favor. At 900 kilometers per hour, he was covering 250M every second. A drone appearing at 500M gave him 2 seconds of warning. Not enough time to dodge, barely enough time to flinch. His eyes tracked every shadow, every shape, every flicker of movement against the gray sky. His hands were steady on the controls, but his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. A shape crossed his nose at maybe 100M, then another below, skimming the frozen fields. He flew through their wake and kept going because stopping was an option and turning wasn't possible. And the only direction that led home was forward through the swarm. His radio crackled. Impact, 30 seconds. Track nominal. The bombs were still flying. The bridge was still the target. Somewhere behind him, 2 French weapons were threading through the same jamming that had been blinding Ukrainian precision munitions for months. Gyros doing the math that GPS couldn't. 20 seconds. An FPV appeared directly ahead, 50M, maybe less, crossing right to left. The pilot jerked the stick on reflex, a tiny correction that was too late to matter. The drone was behind him before his hands finished moving. He was still flying, still alive. 10 seconds. He was almost through. The drone density was thinning as he neared friendly airspace. Ground control's voice came through clearer now, the jamming weaker on this side of the line. Roadrunner 24. Impact imminent. Stand by for BDA. 5 seconds. The pilot crossed into Ukrainian-controlled airspace at 6:17. He didn't see the impact. He was 20 kilometers away, racing west at 800 kilometers per hour. Fuel state amber, hand shaking on the stick, but he heard the call, impact, impact. 15 kilometers behind him, 2 AASM Hammers hit the eastern span of the P-Cross Bridge within half a second of each other. The first bomb penetrated 18 in a concrete before detonating, shattering the support structure. The second found a span already sagging and finished the job. The bridge, covering an assembly point that Russian forces had used for 3 weeks of assaults, dropped into frozen river in a cascade of concrete and steel. If you like this video, then watch this one, a Ukrainian MiG destroying a dam. Bye for now.